Okay, I have hit record as well.
Okay, great. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Greatness Tribe. Today, it is my absolute honor to welcome my personal mentor for online business, e-com, and life perspective, Steve Chou. Steve is the host of the My Wife Quit Her Job podcast and blog, the founder of Bumblebee Linens, the owner of ProfitableOnlineStore.com, which is his e-commerce course, and now the owner of a new blogging course as well, the host of Seller Summit, a YouTuber, a podcaster. My gosh, Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sippy.
Steve, today I really want to get into how you do what you do. And also, I forgot to mention that your kids have their own e-com store, which you talk about quite a lot. So it's really incredible to see what you're doing. But before we do that, I just want to mention some really fun facts about you, which is, first of all, a lot of people ask me how I found Steve Chou. They're like, how do you know Steve? Because I talk about you regularly. Okay. It's a household name. And honestly, it was the name of your podcast. It was so awesome. My wife quit her job. And that's really what got me hooked. So
That's
there's something in the name.
hilarious.
Isn't that funny?
You know what's funny is it actually turns off a lot of people too,
Really?
right?
Stop it.
Because if they want to learn about e-commerce and they go, what the heck is this My Wife Quit Her Job? I think it has more appeal to
That's
women. So
funny.
most of my listeners and viewers are actually women.
Well, could that because maybe women want to learn more and men think they could kind of figure it out on their own? Do you think there's
I
something
think
to
it's the
that?
story, the reason
Okay,
why, right?
interesting. Because I hear
Whereas a
that from
lot,
a lot of men that they have more women listeners.
oh, interesting. Okay, I didn't
Yeah.
know that. Yeah, I thought it was just me.
Well, I mean, honestly, when I saw that and I was looking for someone in the e-com space, I was like, okay, he has a great personality, if that's the name of his podcast. And then as I started listening to you, I was like, your perspective is amazing. And it took me about, I think 6 months between finding you and then joining your course, but it was a great lead in. So, that was awesome. The other thing, this was really funny, but when I don't know why, I always just figured you were like short because I only see your head talking on your videos. And when I met you in person, I was like, oh my gosh, he's actually really tall. I was just really surprised about that. So that was a funny thing. So anyway, Steve, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us how you got into all this stuff?
Yeah. So the reason I got into just online business in general is because my wife wanted to quit her job. Right? It makes sense. You have a kid. I know when I grew up, my parents, both of them, they worked full time and they worked kind of late into the night. So really, I didn't really see them as much as I would have liked. And
Mm,
so when my wife became pregnant with our first child, I wanted to spend a lot more time with them. And so did my wife. And at the time, we were both working full time. I was an engineer. My wife was a financial analyst at a Fortune 500 company. And where we live in the Silicon Valley, you're in New York, right, Sippy?
actually,
Yeah,
Detroit.
Detroit. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. For some
No,
reason, I
it's good.
thought you were New York. Around here, it's ridiculously priced. In fact, we're thinking about getting out maybe.
Oh,
But in
really?
order to get a good house in a good school district, you got to pay a lot of money. So basically, you need those two incomes. And that's where, and I full on wanted her to quit. So we looked for different ways that we could make money. And we just kind of stumbled upon e-commerce. And that's how
Okay.
Bumblebee Linens was born.
So, okay, so you stumbled upon e-commerce. Were you like excited about what you were getting into? Can you tell us kind of what you started doing?
Yeah, let me just give you like the 30-second backstory. So when we got married, my wife knew she was going to cry at the wedding, and we looked all over the place for hankies and we couldn't find any. We ended up finding a whole bunch of handkerchiefs being sold, but they were overseas in China at the factory where you had to buy a whole bunch. So we bought a whole bunch of hankies. We used maybe 6 or so and then sold the rest on eBay, and they sold like hotcakes. And so that's why when it came time to think about how to make money, we got back in touch with that vendor and started selling hankies. I was not excited about selling handkerchiefs because that's just not my thing. But I don't know how many people's thing it is. My wife, it's not her thing either, but it was just a means to an end. But what I found was that by running it, it was really exciting, just the business aspects of it. So it didn't really even matter what I was selling at all.
Wow. And that's kind of something that is so special, I think, about you is that you're able to take something which is like really big and complicated, and then what you've done through learning about it yourself and putting this into practice yourself is be able to break down the steps into such easy to follow steps for your audience. So my question though for you, Steve, is you went from being an electrical engineer to now being a teacher, a podcaster, a business owner. Do you think that you would have had such a reach if you would have stayed at your job, had that kind of impact on people?
Definitely not. And my parents initially weren't happy with all this, but because I spent so much time as an engineer. To be honest with you, I would have been perfectly happy as an engineer for the rest of my life. I really liked my
Really?
job. I had no intentions of quitting, actually.
Mm,
All this stuff just kind of I stumbled upon it, and then like the backstory with me quitting was, the businesses were making 8 to 10x more than my day job, and I get
isn't
paid
that
pretty well
funny?
in the Silicon
Right.
Valley, right? And so I was like, huh, is this worth it then? So I dropped down to 4 days, and I dropped down to 2 days, and then I dropped down to 1 day a week. And then finally, at one point, the upper management had changed, and they called me and they were like, hey, what do you do here? And I was like, actually, I don't really do anything here. I'll be honest with you. I'm here just to consult in case something goes wrong. Because I was
That's
one of like the
hilarious.
three guys on the product. And reach was never my intention. If you know me, I just kind of like huddling behind my monitor, really.
Right.
The engineer is like the perfect job for me.
Right. Which is interesting. So, right now when I look at you, I see that you have what you come out with are these really high-end blog posts that are super informative, full of content. These thorough YouTube videos that walk people through step by step, either how to do things or how to think about things. You have this e-com store, which you've built from nothing. And I know that you did all the behind the scenes work too on your website, selling handkerchiefs, making 7 figures. Okay. You have 2 courses with high level support, live office hours, the most updated research, a podcast, which is growing with sponsors, and you also have a seller summit, which is a gathering every year, a retreat for e-commerce sellers. You also have a YouTube channel. Now, how in heaven's name do you do this and also be very present for your children?
Yeah. So there's a common misconception about all that stuff, right? I probably work between 20 to 25 hours a week. And
That's impossible.
it's all so and again, if you know me, like I try to computerize everything that I can. So a lot of the stuff is automated. And in terms of the content that you're talking about, really the bulk of my time is actually creating that one blog post. Like I will literally, it takes me about 4 to 6 hours to create a blog post. But then from that blog post comes a YouTube video, same content. And then the podcast, as we were kind of chatting about earlier, I use as a vehicle to meet other people, mainly because I think in business, I think the connections that you have actually plays a huge role.
So how do you see that those connections play a huge role actually in your business?
Yeah, I remember when I first started out, especially within the blogging world, like my blog was pretty stagnant for like the first year, maybe year and a half or so. It wasn't until I started attending events, and this is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to throw my own, that I started meeting a whole bunch of other people, sharing strategies and basically helping each other with the content and promotion, that it actually started taking off. So it's really hard to start at least a content-based business kind of in a vacuum.
Okay, so you go to these events and you kind of realize that you need to expand your reach, but yet you really enjoy sitting behind a computer screen. So how do the
Yes.
two go together?
See, my wife calls me an extrovert, but I don't think I am. I'm just a very curious person. So if I meet somebody, like my natural inclination is just to start asking questions like crazy, right? And trying to
Ah,
understand things. And so the main benefit of meeting other people is sharing the strategies. So finding that mastermind group where you can kind of bounce ideas off of one another. And as you become friends with other people, it's weird. It's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? Someone knows someone who knows someone. And so if you need something, then you probably can find someone who can help you, right? And so
interesting.
what's been really rewarding about the blog and I guess the podcast over the e-commerce store is that I feel like I can travel almost anywhere in the world now, send out an email that says, hey, I'm here, anyone want to hang out for the day, and I could probably find someone to hang out with.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That is really awesome. So, okay, back to the strategy, right? You
Okay.
said that you work 25 hours a week, and yet you have like 5 or 6 businesses going on here. I mean, I wouldn't call them each businesses, like the podcast is part of your blog and,
Right.
you know, but okay, so you start with a 4 to 6 hour blog post, you
Hmm.
said.
Yep.
So when do you do that?
I do that on Sunday mornings when my kids are in math class,
I knew
Russian
the
math
answer
class.
to that,
Yeah,
but I
you
just
did?
needed to
Okay.
ask that on the air because it's so funny. I know they go to Russian math class. That's so funny. Do they like it?
Sippy, here's my philosophy. I think life is all, I mean, it's going to sound weird, but I'm getting them used to the grind. You know, they're going to be
Interesting.
doing stuff that they might not enjoy, but once they get through it, then other stuff just becomes so much easier. So they're in school now, and math is kind of like a breeze.
Mm.
And whereas Russian math is kind of like a struggle for them. And I feel like when it comes to business, like you just kind of have to get used to like the boredom at times, right? The tough stuff, so that you can persevere through it in the long run.
Okay, that is a perfect segue actually into your mindset. And you talk a lot about mindset. Like, I really feel like you're a closet philosopher, honestly, because so many of your posts and your videos are talking about philosophy and mindset. I feel that today, in this day and age, everyone is like, oh, being an entrepreneur is so easy. Like, it doesn't even take time. It just, like, manifest the money. You speak very differently, and you say you have a very real message. So, what would you say is like you just discussed the grind? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, what's really funny is a lot of times, when you have been successful with something and then you talk about it in the past, sometimes you forget about it, right?
Mm,
So like when I teach my e-commerce class, sometimes I've forgotten what it's like when you're first starting out and it's really difficult. And so it just so happens right now I'm starting a YouTube channel pretty much from not quite from ground zero, but from the beginning for the most part. And now I remember what the slog is like. I call it the
mm.
slog because you have to just kind of press through, think about it in the long term, and just go about it at a pace that you can maintain forever. And at some point, good things will happen.
Okay, so what do you mean by at some point good things will happen? How long should something take?
Right. So it's always hard. I get to ask that question a lot. Like how long should some things take? I always go into everything that I do with at least a 3 to 5 year time frame for anything. There's this quote, I can't remember who said it, but people often overestimate what they can accomplish in the first year and underestimate what they can accomplish in like 3 years plus, right? A lot of the rewards for anything that you do aren't going to come in that first year.
That's interesting. So what you actually said about the 3 to 5 year window actually has kept me going, like in anything that I start, because I think it's realistic and it's different than what everyone else says, which is like, oh yeah, like launch, your first whatever,
I mean,
hundred
it does
thousand dollars.
happen, right?
Of
It does
course.
happen. I
Yes.
wouldn't call it the norm. Like your mindset has to be 3 to 5 years. It can happen much earlier, and it often does, right? Like I've had students like Tony, who you just interviewed. I think she did 25 grand in her first 3 months, and then 100 grand in a single month by her fourth month, right?
Right,
But
right,
that's
right.
not necessarily the norm, right? There's a lot of luck that comes into play also, and I'm not
Yes.
saying that she was lucky, but in anything that we do, there's always some factor of luck as well.
Well, actually, it's funny that you say that because we did over six figures. I think it was about 9 months in our first year of business. But actually, what made me want to do that was the chance of maybe getting on your podcast because I know that you have people who make six figures on your podcast in the first year. And I was like, I'm getting on that podcast. So that was really funny. Speaking of luck. But okay, so you talk a lot about the slow and steady.
Mhm.
So that is also, I find that very different from most people. Like you talk a lot about, your wife wanting to slow down sales
Yes.
because when talk to me about your philosophy about that.
Yeah, actually, so you got to remember why you started your business in the first place. And I don't know what your whys are, Sippy, but for me, it was always about hanging out more with the family. And at some point, it's really easy to get tied up in just increasing your revenue or increasing your business just for the sake of increasing it, right? At the expense of happiness. So, specifically with our e commerce store, when we were growing really quickly, it's different with physical products, right? Anytime you get a large influx of sales, you actually have to deliver something physically, right, to the customer. And so anytime there's like this huge spike, it's actually very uncomfortable. Like it's
Hmm.
fun to talk about on the surface, like,
Hmm.
oh, I made all this money in a short period of
Hmm.
time. But fulfilling those orders and just all the stress that it can create is it's just very stressful. And it leads to arguments, it leads to unhappiness, it leads to actually time away from the family. Whereas if you kind of choose to grow in a steady rate, then you get the joys of like hitting goals and kind of growing, but at the same time, it's much more comfortable in controlled growth.
And you talk about controlled growth so much, the slow and the steady, the not making so much that you're just, blowing the fish out of the water, but just enough to really enjoy your life and not consume your life. And yet you've also mentioned that your friends at Stanford, where you graduated, are some of them are making billions of dollars, and having
Yeah,
all these big jobs. And you go to these class reunions and you're like, wow. How does that not get to you?
it does.
Does it?
It used to get to me a lot more, but what's happened now is now that we're a little older, like the last reunion I went to, there were people who wanted to just kind of cut back, really.
Really?
Like I have a lot of professional friends, like lawyers and doctors, like they've dropped down to like 1 or 2 days even
Really?
working. And those people that are starting the large companies, they paid their dues and now they just want to relax, right? And so what was ironic about all that is in the last reunion that I went to, people started asking me about what
No
I was doing
way.
because there's just different rewards, right? When you start a company, when you put out content, you have the ability to influence a lot of people, and you kind of build like a following. Whereas you don't really quite get that when you start like the next tech company and that sort of thing. So people ask me questions because it's a lot more rewarding to be helping others than I guess it's a different sort of rewarding.
Right. It is
Yeah.
interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned that because, I see on my, like, I have a coaching practice and like, I would say half of my clientele are people who have been at a job for like 20 years or so and are just like so burnt out and unfulfilled that, they are looking for something else. But what's interesting to me is that you started e-commerce in order to be able to allow your wife to quit her job, but you have found a meaningful way to contribute because I don't know that you would be fulfilled if all it was the e-commerce side.
That's correct, actually, because I mean, the e-commerce side is pretty fun also. Like I kind of treat it like a laboratory now since I'm an engineer at heart. And so when something
Exactly.
new comes out, I'll try it in the store and then I'll just kind of report about it, the
Right.
results.
But you
But
have another side.
yeah, and let me just tell you, this literally just happened yesterday. I got an email from one of the students who just hit 6 figures. She had 2 kids and she was able to quit her job and spend time with her 2 kids. And I'm actually having her on the podcast
Oh,
pretty soon just to hear her story. But
woo!
but she sent me this email and it just made me really happy, like much more happy than like when I hit one of my own milestones or goals. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, absolutely. It's and you talk about this, Steve. You wrote that the more value you could provide, the more money you will make. And you talk a lot about providing value, which will help you stand the test of time. How did you discover this, and how do you suggest people figure out what their value is?
You know what's funny about all this, Sippy, is like you're quoting like my blog posts and stuff as if like I planned all this stuff ahead of time. These are just things that I've picked up over time, right? So sorry, what was the original question?
Well,
Right.
you were discussing people providing value as their
Mhm.
biggest value add, right? Like the more value you could provide to the world.
Right.
And I know that you weren't planning this at a time. I was just like digging up, all your, because I think your philosophy is like fantastic, So I was just wondering how you figured out that providing value is the most valuable asset and how you suggest that other people figure out their value.
Yeah. This is actually like the most counterintuitive thing I've ever learned.
Hmm.
Uh, by giving first, that actually, I'll give you an example in just a sec, but by giving first, like people will just naturally gravitate towards you. And once you have that audience, the money just kind of works itself out, right? I'll give you an example. And so we teach I teach an e-commerce course, and one of the ways that I sell it is I give a webinar where I bring people on, I give a live presentation. Now, one of the dilemmas of giving a webinar is, should I be giving away too much of the actual class so that they might not actually want to sign up going forward, right? If you give away too much of the good stuff, then they might not want to pay for the real stuff, right? That's what most people think. But what I found is that if you just teach and just give it all away,
Mm.
people are going to be much more likely to sign up for the full thing because they're thinking to themselves, wow, he gave me so much value. in this free part of the course that the real thing must be, 5 million times more amazing, right? Because it's paid. It's kind of counterintuitive, but just based on that analogy or that reality, that's the way things work in life, right? If you put out something good and people like your work, they're going to be much more likely to actually want to give you money when the time comes.
Mm. So how did you realize that your value add is, this teaching side, which kind of was never really part of your life until then?
Yeah, I stumbled upon that as well. I had no intention of teaching anything. It's
Wow,
just people were asking for it.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
And is that the most valuable part of your business now?
Yes, it certainly is a major portion of it, but there's other
Yes.
ways of generating revenue. You're just talking about my wife quit her job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess all your courses and, everything that you're doing in the helping field,
Yeah,
I
it's
guess.
certainly a major revenue driver. So is affiliate marketing, so is sponsorships and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Interesting. And
Yeah.
how do you and so when somebody's trying to figure out what they could do to add value, how can they do that too to make sure that they're really putting out something of value?
Yeah, people often underestimate what they know, right? So if you pick something that you're really into or really interested in and just documenting it, that's probably the best way to do it. I mean, everyone has
Yeah.
something that they're into and that they know a lot about. They might not think that it's interesting, but there's someone out there that is probably going to be interested in it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Oh my gosh. Steve, what I want to do is I kind of have some of your like success tips written down or your strategies, your mantras, I guess, written down. And I wanted to just run through some of them and ask you for your thoughts or to expound on some of them because some of them are really cool. For example, you wrote and speak about that creating your own luck is something that is a learned skill. Could you tell us about that? Because I think people feel like they have to get lucky.
Yeah. So my buddy JD Roth actually made the perfect analogy about this. Everything that you do or everything that you do positively that gives out value earns you a new lottery ticket, right? So everyone that you meet, every piece of content that you put out, all the value that you give earns you another lottery ticket. And after a certain point, if you have enough lottery tickets, that increases your chance of actually hitting something big, right? And so
Mm.
that's why increasing your luck takes some amount of work, right? You got to keep earning those lottery tickets.
So put yourself out there and put
Put
out your
yourself out there.
content.
Yep. Content, connections, like meeting people we talked about earlier. All of those are lottery tickets that you just kind of throw in this pool, and there's a drawing every now and then, and you can increase your luck. You can't guarantee your luck, so you just
Hmm.
have to spend your time amassing those lottery tickets.
You know, Steve, I actually have a question for you about connections because you talk so much about connections and, your podcast guests are connections and people you're meeting. Do you like follow up with everyone regularly? Like, how do you do all that?
Um, I don't follow up with everyone regularly. It's kind of like if I meet someone at an event and we
Hmm.
hang out for the night, for some reason, I guess it's like this for all my friends. Like I don't need to talk to someone every single day.
Right.
But when we
Right.
do get together, you already have that connection
Yeah.
and it just kind of carries on where it left off.
And what about your podcast guests?
Podcast guests the same way. Like if they ever want something, they'll ask me and then I'll help them, right? Because
Like
we
you
already have
know
that
each other,
connection.
but yeah,
Yeah.
you have the connection.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not like a cold acquaintance anymore at that point.
And interesting, Tony just mentioned to me that you guys met at an event and then now you have a whole business partnership, which is really interesting that, have that
Yeah,
went down that road. So
absolutely.
that's really cool.
Yeah, we met at an event in 2014 through a mutual friend, once again,
Right, right.
right? And we hit it off. She joined the class. She did really well in the class. I was like, okay, wow, she's pretty good. And then I wanted to throw an event. Actually, I didn't want to throw an event, but she was trying to talk me into it. Like, you like
Right.
events, they're so valuable. I will actually run the event for you. You just need to sell the tickets and get the speakers. And I was like, okay, deal. And that's how it all started.
Okay, let me ask you about that because I've noticed with a lot of different ecom teachers and just business teachers in general that they really have to hustle to get their tickets sold. And I've noticed with your event that they sell out really quickly. So, how does that happen?
Well, we limit the amount of tickets.
Well, but I think most people do. I mean, you're not limiting them to like 50, like you have a huge amount of people showing up.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people who run these huge volume events. That's just not the type of event I wanted to run. Like I like small events where everyone just kind of hangs out with each other the entire time. Like they eat together, they hang out. And so so the event's around 200 people. And if you think about it, I mean, selling 200 tickets isn't that
Well,
big of
I've
a deal.
seen people struggle to sell the 200 tickets. That's why I kind of like I've tried to dig into like what makes, because also when what I noticed there is that the caliber of the people were like really incredible, really high end, just caring, hardworking people. So what's kind of your secret to building this kind of audience that's really loyal, jumps when you have an offering, and is just really, really good?
And once again, there it's counterintuitive, right? If you put out tickets to like the general audience, then it's not going to be as, I guess, a high caliber of an audience. But if you put restrictions on, like we do revenue restrictions,
Mm,
and we also, I think we're priced higher than I guess probably the average event. That just naturally selects out higher caliber people. Combination of those
mm.
two things.
Interesting. It was really incredible to see that, all these people coming together. Let me just get back to some of the questions I had for you. You wrote that people have to learn how to sell, and people hate selling,
Mhm.
which I find this is so common. Talk to me about your philosophy about sales.
Yeah, I hate sales. I mean, it's when I first started out, like I'm an engineer. I just put me behind a monitor and a keyboard and I'm good, right?
Right.
I just learned over time that being able to persuade people, and I have to always just talk about the Cialdini book, Psychology of Persuasion. I recommend that everyone read that book because it applies to everything in life. Think about it this way: everything that you need or want, even if you're at your full time job, involves persuading someone to
Yeah.
do something, right? And just to be able to, and it doesn't have to be public speaking per se, it just needs to be, you need to just practice your ability to communicate and get your ideas out there and be able to convince people of certain things. This is just something I discovered when I was selling my digital course, not so much the e-commerce store because that's all handled via a computer. But once I started doing that with the content creation, that's when I picked up all those skills and really realized how valuable they are.
Which is interesting. Also, when people are hesitant to sell, I always think, like, what if somebody doesn't buy your course because you don't want to sell it? Like, my life would not have been the same if you didn't persuade me to buy your course in that first webinar. Everything changed. My entire future changed. So it is, I think it's like adding a service kind of. It's not really selling. I mean, you're selling because there has to be an exchange, but
I
yeah,
still don't
you're
even do any sort of hard sells. I don't really sell, to be honest with you. I just say, hey, here's my offer. You know, you can join me, hop on my bus, or or not, right? I don't do any hard sells, and my wife jokes to me about this, but it's all about getting people on your bus. And I use the term wearing them down, like because my wife likes to say, "Yeah, you wore me down. Finally, I decided to marry you." But it takes time, right? It took you what 6 months before you joined the class, right?
yeah,
Oftentimes you just need to get in front of someone multiple times. You don't even have to sell. They just need to see you and hear your voice multiple times until
100%.
they're ready to jump on your bus, right?
So when you say you don't do hard sales, like do you do, the normal sales strategies where like, there's a bonus, it's only until tonight, yada
I do
yada.
do that. Yes. I feel like, and this is all in that book. You guys should all read it. There needs to be some sort of sense of urgency in anything in life, right? Like you need a reason to just kind of take action on something now. And those are just ways of increasing that sense of urgency.
So how often do you actually launch your courses and stuff?
The course is actually open all year round. So my strategy there is I get people on my email list, and then there's a whole series of videos that teach e-commerce. And then for the people, some people just watch that mini course and then they sign up right away. Other people, I get at the end of the month, I'll just do like a webinar because people often like to interact with the person that's teaching them.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's as close to live interaction as it is. It's not really a one-on-one conversation, but it's pretty close to a live interaction. They just want to see what the style is of how you teach, and that's what those webinars are for. It kind of like scoops
Ooh.
up the rest of the people who are on the fence and
So you
gets
do it
them to
every
join.
month.
Usually once a month, not always, but
Wow.
yeah.
That's cool. And so then there's specific bonuses each time for the webinar members or?
Yeah. So I'll include like since I run that event, we record all the
Yeah.
sessions, so I'll include those. Sometimes I'll offer like a one-on-one consult
Oh, that's
if
cool.
if like for the first X number of people who sign up because they want to talk one-on-one. Really, what's funny about all this stuff, it's all psychological, right? I think everyone has it in them. They just need confidence, really,
Mm.
right? People are worried about losing money, but it's pretty safe compared to running any brick and mortar store. Before we
Oh,
started
yeah.
before we started e-commerce, we were thinking about launching a food prep service. We were thinking about launching a Kumons, if you know what that is.
I
Um,
don't. What is that?
all the it's basically like this prep class for kids. I was like, oh
Oh,
yeah, we could
wow.
send our kids there, but
I'll send my kids to you. I'm not teaching them Russian
the
math.
minimum investment on those were like 250 to 500,000. It required a
Really?
loan, right?
Yeah.
Whereas you can literally start an e-commerce, the bare minimum, like $3 a month, right? With an affiliate store or drop shipping or
Right,
something like
right,
that.
right.
So
Wow. Okay, so interesting. So let me ask you a question, which is you speak a lot about living below your means. And I remember you once even gave an example, which was like the first time you guys flew first class and you were like, your wife was like so excited and she's like, "Oh my God, this is the life." And you were like, "I don't want to have to like do that always." What's your philosophy about that?
so first off, I never got to fly first class. My wife flew first class on a girls
That's
vacation.
so funny.
Um, I don't like to get okay. So yeah, my philosophy on that is I don't like to get used to good life. Like mainly because once you once you've experienced something really good and it becomes a norm, it's not exciting anymore.
Hmm.
Whereas if it's occasional, then it just makes it so much more meaningful. Like in restaurants, like I don't go out to the nicest restaurants all the time, but we'll go out for an anniversary and really appreciate that a lot more. So my
Interesting.
wife always goes, "Hey, I'm flying first class from now on." After that first class experience,
Right.
and I told her, if this is like all the time, you would think that this is normal, and if you ever were to fly coach or forced to fly economy, you would really dread going on the plane at that point, right?
Yeah.
She was like, "I don't care. I'm still gonna fly first class."
So does she?
No, she doesn't.
That's
She's
awesome.
very frugal. Uh,
Right, and so you guys are, and so I'm just curious about that because it's kind of uncommon, and you talk about it a lot. Like you're pretty cheap about the way you run your store. Like you like to run things really lean. And you guys are really careful with how you spend. Is this like, are you gonna ever just go all out and have a lot more fun, or what are you thinking?
well, just because you're frugal doesn't mean you can't go out and have a lot of fun, right? Um, I like peace of mind. That's what I value the most, right? So even if like everything were to dry up all of a sudden right now with everything, we could live for probably like a decade, right? With our current
Mm,
spend. That just gives me peace of mind so that when I want to buy something or do something, I'll just go out and do it. I'm just very practical about it.
and what about your kids? Like, do you allow them to just kind of live the high life, or are you guys careful with that too?
I mean, I think they're really spoiled, to be honest with you.
Oh, do you?
Like they have a lot of things that they probably take for granted, which my wife and I, we were like, hey, maybe we'll just send them to like, Africa or a third world country or
Right, right,
something,
right.
just for a summer and just so they
See
deal
what's
with it.
out there.
One thing that's important to me is like we don't allow them on social media at all. I think social media is kind of evil.
It is.
I kind of wish that it never was invented, just because
I know.
everyone always puts out their best stuff. You see everyone's highlight reel, and you start feeling inadequate about yourself. So that's one thing
Yeah.
that we're doing with them.
So you are like, so you're not limiting like stuff, I guess, but you're more doing limiting like the what they're exposed to.
Well, I mean, they don't have any money, right? Like we have to pay for anything that they want to do. So
Right.
anything educational, like Russian math, for example, we'll pay for all those things. Sports, all those activities we'll pay for. Material possessions, usually we make them think about it for a long time and see if they
Mm,
actually want it. And here's the question we always ask. Okay, well, if you really want that, are you willing to pay for 50% of it yourself and we'll cover the other
mm.
50%? And that makes them think about whether they actually really want it or not. And oftentimes they end up going, okay, no, I don't
That
want
is
it.
so funny.
Yeah.
And so is that paid from their e-com store? Are they still doing that?
They still are, but schools started, and
So they don't have as much time.
so they don't have as much time to do it anymore. Um, Especially
Interesting.
now that the daughter is getting older. But they get money from. the holidays, they get lucky money from like the grandparents
Right, of
and that
course.
and that
Oh,
sort of
so
thing.
that's where the decision comes from.
I'm trying to instill that into them, like frugality also. And my daughter's pretty frugal. My son is a little bit less frugal, but by just asking him some of these questions, like oftentimes, okay, so here's a good example. We went out to eat the other night, and he wanted to get. I know it's bad, like depriving your kids of food, but he wanted to get like these king crab legs or something. It was like $200 or whatever. And I was like, okay, well, if you really want those, I tell you what, you only have to pay for $50 of it, and I'll pay for the rest of your meal. And he was like, okay. He likes to always pick the most expensive thing on the
Did he
menu.
do it?
He didn't do it. He
Did he
didn't
do
do it.
it?
He didn't do
Oh,
it.
that's
He didn't do it.
funny. That is
We
funny.
feed them well. It's just like
I'm
every now he
sure.
always likes to like test the
Test
waters
the
on what he can get
waters.
for free,
Well,
And the only way to
maybe.
really find out is whether he's willing to put his own money down on the line.
Which isn't that true for anyone? Like seeing when people are actually willing to commit, that's really the test of if your product is good or, if people like it.
Yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
you have to see that. That's so interesting. I want to ask you, Steve, you write about always learning. And I'm just curious. I know that people are super overwhelmed by content right now. There are so many courses, so many blogs, so many podcasts, so many gurus. What's your philosophy? How does somebody figure out who they should listen to and how to continue learning in a healthy way?
Yeah. I mean, I follow a lot of people online, and after a while, it's not the information that matters because the information's out there, right? It's all a matter of who you want to learn from and how it's presented to you, right? I mean, if you look around, you're right. The information is freely available everywhere, but how it's taught and the personality and philosophy of the instructor, that's what kind of sets you apart. So you just
Hmm.
pick someone that you like and want to learn from, that you trust, and who's pragmatic about like testing everything, and then just pull the trigger.
So, how much do you recommend people should be learning? Like, let's say a regular ecom owner or an online, like a course owner. What should somebody be doing each week
Each week in terms of running the business, like
in terms of, no,
I
in
think I
terms
know
of
where you're going with
learning,
this, Tippy.
like
Yeah.
continued education?
Yeah. So every business, including mine, has some amount of maintenance that's required, right? Like just to keep my head above water, there's certain tasks I have to do every week, but I make sure that I spend at least one, maybe 1.5 days every week just sitting there and learning or thinking, right? As opposed to just doing. So what does that come out to? Like 20%? So I guess 20% of your time should be spent learning. Um,
Okay. So you know what? Actually, now that you mentioned that, I have your routine kind of written down because I thought it was really interesting. Where you blog on Sundays, right, during
yeah.
Russian math. Okay, and then you said Monday to Wednesday are your courses and podcasts. So that's kind of like updating content, office
Uh-huh.
hours. Is that right? Okay.
Yep. Yep.
And then Thursday is your ecom day. So what is that like?
No,
Working
no,
on your
no.
website or?
Okay, so Monday is really when I get almost all the maintenance work done. So that's
Oh,
the publishing the blog post, having the podcast ready to go. I don't actually publish that until later, but it's ready to go, and then the YouTube video just kind of ready to go. Right.
oh, so it's your
Tuesday, the email
content
goes.
day.
What's that?
So it's your content day.
It's my content day. Just I call it the maintenance day, right? Everything that
Right.
needs to get done in order to just keep things afloat is
Okay,
done on
interesting.
Monday. So it ends up being my busiest day actually.
Yeah, sure.
And then Tuesday, I just kind of prep for the office hours that happen on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Wednesdays, and keep in mind, like these office hours sessions are only like an hour each. So
Right, exactly.
Wednesday, um, I give the office hours and I'll work on the blog that day. Thursday is pretty much my e-commerce day, usually. So I do have an office hours for my other class, but I mainly think about e-commerce stuff that needs to get done. And
Mm.
then Friday is kind of like a think day where
So
I
what does
just
that look like? I like to think day.
the Friday think day, I literally just sit in front. It's not very exciting, Sippy. I just sit in front of my computer and I have all these like to-do lists, and I think about just the businesses and where I want them to go and what really needs to be done at a higher level, not task-based level, but just kind of what direction I want to be going in.
So you do that every Friday?
Pretty much. I mean, Friday is definitely not like a active typing productive sort of day. It's more like a planning thing.
So like you think about what kind of blogs you want to write or what is
No, it's pretty unstructured.
Mhm.
It's just like at a high level, where do I want to be? I just kind of evaluate where I'm at, what's going right, what's going wrong, and then oftentimes I'll even plan for for the next week too, like what
Like your
needs to get done.
schedule.
Yeah. So for example, like
Mm.
right now, um, like I have two new projects that are going to launch at some point, like another YouTube channel, another podcast, right, with Tony, who you just had on. So I'll think about like the direction we want to take, or how we want to frame that. So we actually recently rebranded that course. Even like these are
Oh,
just some high level decisions. Like we named it Profitable Audience as opposed to Profitable Online Blog,
I thought
because
something was different. Okay.
yeah, because
Interesting.
we're taking it, a more holistic approach about content creation in general. So we're going to be covering YouTube's, podcasts, blogging, just everything related to content. Those are just like decisions that if you're just kind of have your head down in the weeds, you don't think about kind of like the bigger picture.
So how long do you spend on this?
Usually just the morning. So my typical day is I'm done working by 12:30 or 1.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
fun.
And then the
So,
the afternoon, the kids are out of school, and it's weird right now, right? Because they're
right.
just
Yeah.
right
Now it's weird.
downstairs. Like we'll go for a walk, we'll bounce in the trampoline or something like that. So the afternoons, I kind of usually kick back and just hang out.
Interesting. And Steve, what kind of things are you doing for your own health? Like I know when you had an operation like a while ago. You know what? Actually, can you tell that story? Because I know that was like a period that was difficult to get
Oh
through.
yeah, yeah. I tore my Achilles tendon. Um, and then that's when I actually realized how important health was. Because all of a sudden I couldn't walk, I couldn't do all the exercise that I normally do, and I literally just sat in bed watching Netflix all day, and it was kind of depressing.
Yeah, I can
So,
imagine. So did something change for you from that? Do you have a routine now after that?
well, actually, on, my wife basically just threatened that that better not happen again, because she was shoving me around and doing all that stuff with the kids and everything. It's driving her crazy. I've always believed that maintaining health is very important to productivity. This happened mainly, I think 2014, when I cut out carbs out of my diet. I realized that like my head was so much more clear, and not having
Mm,
the extra weight was it really helped actually for sports as well, in addition to anything that I was working on, which is
interesting.
why I put out that one YouTube video where I talked about how just eating right is actually probably one third the battle, right? Like
That's
you need that
interesting.
clarity for
Yeah.
productivity. If you're tired after lunch and just lose the entire afternoon, that's like half your day gone.
Yeah. 100%. Like I recently stopped eating any sort of meat really because I just find that I'm so tired for like 3 or 4 hours after, and it's just not worth it.
Mhm.
So it's interesting. Okay, Steve, I have a couple of last questions that I'm going to ask you for your final words. But there's a few, I actually have like a few more lists of questions, but we're just not going to get to them. So everybody go read Steve's blog and listen to the YouTube channel, watch the YouTube channel. But a couple of important things that stuck out is you mentioned joining a mastermind. You
Mhm.
said that if you're not part of a mastermind, you need to be part of one. So first of all, why? And second of all, how does somebody find one?
Yeah. So the main reason why is when you're working on your business, you're kind of short-sighted. You can't see the bigger picture, and just having another set of eyes often really helps. Also, when in a good mastermind group, you usually have a complementary set of skills. Like you're good at something, someone else in your group is good at something, and you basically just help each other through it, right?
So what does your mastermind structure kind of look like? How did you guys find each other and what happens now?
Yeah, I found all of my mastermind vendors at events. So I
So
have
and they're not paying to be part of it,
nope, nope.
but yet they're
Um,
committed and show up.
they're committed and they show up. So it depends. Like both of my groups are kind of informal, where we meet and we just kind of talk about what's working. And we also have a Facebook group where, something's working for us, or if we need to be aware of something, we'll just kind of post it in the group.
So it's not like a structure like we
It's
meet
not as
once a month
structured.
or
There was one mastermind which was very structured that I used to belong to, where we would switch off the hot seat. Like everyone would present some sort of problem that they had that was the whole focus of the entire meeting.
okay.
And that's how we ran that. So it just depends on what you like. Like personally, and that group was actually meeting every week. And I was like, hey, I don't have like problems every week. I don't, I was like racking my brain trying to think of things to present there. Whereas I prefer kind of like the more informal approach because I don't move as fast as some people do, I guess.
Interesting. Which I and you wrote that somewhere. Actually, I had that written down that you said like I'm not smarter than most people, and I actually don't work very fast, and yet you have this entire empire built. So I found that very encouraging. Which I don't know. I don't believe you. I don't think that you're not smarter than everyone. I do think you're smarter than everyone, but you said that. So
I honestly think everyone should learn how to code, like even just a little bit, because that's
yeah,
where all
you
the time
said
savings are.
that.
Yeah.
That kind of freaks me out. Like,
I
what do
mean,
you mean?
just think coding. Okay, I shouldn't use the word coding because that word's intimidating, right?
It is.
But you need to be able to do repetitious tasks quickly. Like one easy way to do that, I guess, is to hire it out, right? But that's expensive.
It
But there's
is.
so many little things that you can do with a computer that will just like think about email, right? A computer handles email for you, right? So you can reach out and broadcast to a bunch of people. There's all these little tasks in a business that no one's going to write software for, right? Because it's specific to your business that you can automate. Something even as simple as like I have a little script that I wrote that when someone signs up for the bonus that we talked about in the webinar, they are automatically sent the virtual passes for the
Mm-hmm.
seller summit. Like they're two different systems, but it's code in that like it's code, but it's just really connecting things together. It's nothing that when I think about like my coworkers in the engineering space, like they're thinking about complex algorithms and how to
Right,
solve
right,
this.
right,
And
right.
this type of coding isn't like that. It's more about just like connecting dots,
But how are
right?
we supposed to learn that? We already have so much to learn.
Yeah. So there's tools out there that will help you connect stuff like Zapier and Integromat, like if you don't want to code. I think everyone, if you're going to be an online business though, you should at least learn HTML and CSS.
Are you serious?
I think like basic,
Wow. Wow,
mainly
Steve.
because like if you're going to be, that's like starting a store selling clothing and not knowing anything about clothing, right?
Right.
If you're going to be in the web space, like I hate, and I see this all the time. I have people or friends who are just reliant on like a developer. And guess what? If that developer ever leaves or they're not available, then they're
Totally.
kind of stuck, right?
100%.
There are these little
Absolutely.
things that you just should know how to do over time. Like you don't have to know
Okay.
them right away, but over time you should learn them.
You know what? I'm going to take that challenge just because I want to develop my brain. So I'm going to just say that is a really good thing that I'm going to probably learn because I always said I'll never learn code. So,
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's people out there that like Tony, for example, she doesn't know how to code, but she knows basic HTML and CSS, and she's
oh,
pretty tech
wow.
averse, right?
Oh, interesting that she knows
Yeah.
that. Okay, that's good to
But
know.
now, like she can design Shopify stores. She knows how to move stuff on her
Wow.
blog. I mean, these are all just skills so that she doesn't anything more complicated. Of course, she has to talk to a developer, but
Sure.
like for most day-to-day emergencies and stuff, she can handle a lot of those herself.
Interesting. Okay, I'm gonna look into that, Steve. That's a good tip. I actually had it written down, but I was gonna skip over that, but you brought it up, so thank you. My last question for you is I'm kind of torn between two. One is that you speak a lot about how success is mental, working on what's important first, consistent progress, but we did cover that, quite a bit. My Maybe I'll ask you this. You speak a lot about speaking your mind. And, I think for me, that's definitely what attracted me to your brand was like you just say funny things. Like you say things about marriage, you say things about your experience, you say, and you said something like about being weird. Um, how did this become your philosophy? And I think it's really important. So can you talk to us about it?
Yeah, this all had to do with blogging. Like when I first started out blogging, I didn't want to upset anyone, right? So I just kind of wrote vanilla content that was informative, but I never took a stance on anything, right? It was only after I started taking a stance on something that the content actually really started taking off. So like your first instinct, and again, this is counterintuitive. Your first instinct is you don't want people to hate you. You want to be universally liked, right? But the way you become popular is to be divisive in a way, right? You're going to have people that love your philosophies, and then you're going to have people that don't like you. And ironically, as soon as you start attracting people who don't like you, that's when you know that you've kind of hit upon something a little bit bigger.
Mm,
Because you want to stand out, right? If you're just writing mediocre things, then people will read what you have to put out or whatever content you have to put out and forget about you right away.
100%.
But as soon as you say something that's a little bit, it doesn't even have to be edgy. It just has to be like, it just has to stand out in some way. People will remember you more.
So was that a process for you to move from vanilla to
It
spice?
was. And you know what's funny about this is like my wife, she's very conservative. So whenever I write something, like she goes over and she's like, oh no, take that out, take that out, take that out. I'm like, hey, look, we used to get into lots of fights about this. And so finally I was just like, okay, the blog is mine and the
Oh,
e-commerce store,
interesting.
like content stuff is her domain. And so now I just do whatever I want and it's worked out.
That
Yeah.
is so funny.
Because it's
And
counterintuitive, right?
it is, but I agree with you that I see that, whenever somebody finally takes that stand, that's when you're like, oh, like you start paying attention. So,
I mean, it backfires. So, like, one of my tactics for outreach is I'll often make fun of the person that have as a podcast guest, right?
yeah, I saw that. That's very funny.
Just to gauge whether they have a sense of humor, because like if I do something that stands out, they're going to remember me as an interviewer, like if they're bigger name, right? Just it's important almost for me to be memorable as opposed to in some way, right? That's
Definitely.
backfired in certain cases where like not majorly, but we're clearly we're just never going to be friends.
Oh, that's
You know,
funny.
you know what I'm saying? Like
Like, what
if
do you mean? Like, what did you do? What happened?
just like some of the jokes, I guess. Maybe I took it a little too far, too early, too far. Um I can't think of anything right offhand, but I just
Well, because I saw that you were sending out like photos to your
yeah,
guests that were
Photoshop
like
photos.
funny,
Yeah.
like somebody who's a diet expert, you'll send them like a picture of themselves eating French fries, things like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
funny.
It is to certain people, but certain people might not find that stuff funny. You know what I'm saying?
Mm, yeah.
Um, which is again, like one of my philosophies is to never just take yourself too seriously. So I'm clearly not going to get along with someone who is offended by something like that, right? And
Right.
so that's fine. You're a great interview and we'll probably never be friends, but
But if they like it,
if they
then
like it, that creates a
that
connection,
creates a real connection that's way deeper than like, hey, thanks for coming on the show, things like
right?
that.
That you can joke about like in the
Exactly. That's
future.
really
Yeah.
funny. So Steve, just in closing, what would be your advice to people who really you know, the trend that I'm seeing is that people are looking for satisfaction in their life. They really want to use who they are to make an impact. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. Some people are already in the online space. They don't feel like it's making as much of an impact as they want. Some people have been at a job for a really long time and they're like, I know I need something else. What's your I guess success tip or just any sort of takeaway that you can leave us with?
I mean, assuming you don't want to invest a lot of money into it, just pick a medium and just start putting out content on something, right? Whether that be YouTube, it just depends on what you like, YouTube, podcast, or blogging. Whether you like to write or put out videos, just do it on a consistent basis. I think consistency is the key here. Pick a pace that you can maintain forever, and just start doing it as if it's like an afterthought. So everything I do is like that, right? That routine I have on Monday, like I tell myself I'm going to be doing that forever, and it just happens. And good things will happen. Like this YouTube channel, I've been at it for 6 or 7 months already, and it's not going to sound like a lot of money, but it's generating almost $700 a month of passive
Hmm.
income now, right? And while that money isn't life changing, right now I feel like every video I put out adds like $50 incrementally to that monthly revenue, and it's growing. It was a painful slog in the beginning when I'd put out a video and I'd get like 100 viewers, but just over time, I know I have the confidence that over time it's going to just continue growing. It's like a stock that can only go up, essentially. And that's basically what content is all about, right? The more you put out, and what ends up happening on YouTube land first is once you put out that video, if you have a whole library and if you've been consistent, people are going to want to watch the rest of your library. And so it can only snowball from there, but it just takes time to build up that library.
And is that what you would say about just becoming a millionaire in general? Is
Yeah. If you look, no one has become a millionaire overnight. right? No one has done it. Like they've had past failures or whatnot. It's just a learning process. And if you just keep at it, eventually something good will happen, assuming you've amassed enough lottery tickets.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Like I said, I think your voice is very unique in our space because you really take a very practical approach, very real, and you take people's finances into account. And you talk a lot about your personal happiness over just making billions of dollars, which is very refreshing as a fellow parent and entrepreneur. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. What's the best way for people to connect with you and find out more about you?
Yeah, I guess the best way is just to go over to mywifequitterjob.com. If you guys are interested in e-commerce, I have a free 6-day mini course. If you're interested in blogging, I have another mini course. If you already have like an online business, I also have an advanced version, which talks about, you know, increasing conversions and building more connections. But yeah, that's probably the best way.
Okay, and social media?
Social media, at my wife quit is Twitter, and my Facebook. I actually don't even know the address of the Facebook page.
What about
Um,
Instagram? I think most people are on
Instagram
Instagram.
is my wife quit. Yep. And then YouTube on my wife. I'm the my wife quitter job e-commerce channel.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, Steve. It was so much fun having you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Have a great day.